I would have regret if I wouldn't have quit my job. So it was kind of like black and white for me that this is the time to do it.
No regrets, right?
No, absolutely. I'm not building just a shooter game. People are going to see.
Man, I haven't been this excited for a video game in like my entire life, dude!
Gotta keep telling myself this is just a demo. This is crazy. I actually feel like I'm being hunted.
All I know is that it looks absolutely stunning. I've been searching for a game that looks like this for a really, really long time.
The guy making this game has been one of the most transparent developers that I have seen. I'm a big fan of these environments, man. The work he's done here is pretty incredible.
I am actually having a complete blast. This is probably one of the best technical demos that has ever been released ever, and it's almost like a class for any other studio on how to do public demos.
Hey everybody, I had the chance to speak with the developer behind the anticipated indie title Road to Vostok. He has an awesome career, starting with the military, then transitioning into video game development teaching, and finally quitting his job in pursuit of his dream of making video games. We take a look at his journey and dive deeper into the game to find out what we can expect when the game finally releases. With that said, let's go beyond the pixel and uncover the full story of Road to Vostok. So, I would like to start off by saying that in my opinion, and actually in the opinion of many other large YouTubers, you are, and I'm going to quote here, one of the most transparent developers that they have ever seen. And if I personally can add something to that quote, I'm going to say you're the most educative and the most entertaining. And following your devlogs not only excites me and others to play Road to Vostok, but also I kind of treat them as mini-series because of how well they're directed and structured. Could you please say, what was your inspiration for such devlogs? Because they're really different to the other ones that we have seen. And do you have any directing experience? Did you learn this somewhere? Or is it something that came naturally for you? Because essentially what's happening is you're providing like a developer masterclass for all sorts of developers out there.
Yeah, most of the things that I currently try to implement with this project are kind of like reflecting from my past, because I remember those times when I was a huge DayZ mod fan back in the days, and I remember those days when I heard that DayZ is going to build this standalone product, and I was so kind of like itching to have more information and see how the development progresses, but there was so little information and it was so scattered, and there wasn't any kind of like feed my desire to learn more and follow the project. So I remember how frustrating that was as a like enthusiast. So with Road to Vostok, I'm kind of like trying to be the opposite of what I felt back in the day. So being as transparent as possible, providing new information as frequent as possible. And to be honest, I don't feel like I'm doing that good of a job. I'm seeing that kind of like this is the minimum you should do as a developer, but like the current state of the industry is a bit different. There's all kinds of NDAs and embargoes, and people like to keep their productions as secret as possible. I don't know who decided to go with that route, because in my mind there should not be any like bridge between players and developers. They all should be in the same boat with the same production, and especially with the survival genre, there have been so many vaporware projects and rug pulls from the blue-eyed players like myself. So I think this is the only route for a believable indie production nowadays in a survival genre to be this transparent and at least try to be this transparent. So I see this as a must-have thing.
Honestly, your devlogs are, a breath of fresh air. And to be honest, I'm seeing more and more indie developers kind of take this approach of connecting with the audience as much as possible through the devlogs. But you're not only explaining what you're making, you're also showing how you're making it. And when I say by you're creating a masterclass, I'm pretty sure that any developer who wants to make a game could just download all your devlogs, follow your let's say work routine, and I'm pretty sure they're going to be in good shape. Can I just ask, how long does it take you to create these devlogs? How much time do you dedicate to actually creating them?
Yeah, it's definitely important. And if you followed my channel, it's been quite an iterative process because I have this I was a visual game design teacher before this becoming a full-time developer for Road to Vostok. So I have this teaching background, and the first few devlogs were highly kind of like oriented towards more of the teaching aspect of me. So there were kind of like more effort put into explaining and showcasing how the each features are made and what I'm trying to innovate. So there was this teaching part of me that made those first few devlogs, but then I tried to kind of like move to this more efficient route because those first devlogs took a long time to edit. I'm not that skillful of editing, and I'm kind of a perfectionist in some sense, so that wasn't that efficient route. So then I tried to move towards this more like a few minutes, action-packed, lots of clips in a short video period of time. I call those videos as VIP, work in progress videos. Those performed quite well, but then kind of like some part of me wasn't satisfied with those, so I transitioned back to this more longer format, which is now kind of like 10-minute or plus. And I have tried to find this sweet spot between fast, easy to make, and somewhat kind of like high quality, trying to explain these things. But to be honest, I'm still kind of struggling because some part of me would like to make those like long form, really educating style videos, but I don't have the time because the progress of the production is more important. So this is kind of like the middle ground that I have currently tried to implement.
Understood. No, that's definitely, I can definitely see the teaching background coming through. And personally, me, I have a graphic design background, and seeing the way you present and the way you portray everything puts a smile on my face because I see such a beautiful piece of work. And when you say that you're not satisfied, I have to tell you, you have to be satisfied because honestly, it's a beautiful piece of work. And thank you actually very much for producing content like that.
Actually, I skipped your kind of like answer a question. How long do these kind of like require time? So I would say, for example, I'm releasing next devlog within maybe 5 days from now, and that's one of those newer format which is like plus 10 minutes. So I would say I have built kind of like specific tools within the game engine to help me record stuff. So for example, I have made these fly cams and all kinds of like helpers to make those devlog. But I would say it's something along the lines of maybe 10 hours.
10 hours per week?
No, per week, meaning the next devlog, for example, took me like 10 hours to make. But my biggest time sink is actually recording the gameplay clips because I don't have that good hardware as a developer. And I kind of like, I'm a weird developer in a sense that I don't, even though I could afford buying like top tier machines, like most game studios do, I prefer using kind of like mid-end hardware because I see that when you are working as a developer, you should use the hardware that most of the gamers actually use. So you kind of like optimize your game automatically because it has to run performantly on your machine also. But that has kind of like the side effect that some aspects of the production are more difficult. For example, recording high quality clips may stutter once in a while. So the biggest pain point for me is making those gameplay clips. I have to re-record a bunch of clips numerous of times, so that's kind of like the most time-consuming aspect now.
Wow.
But I still have to upgrade my PC at some point, but I've tried to stick with this like low to mid hardware in terms of development.
Can I just ask you this interesting question that I really wanted to ask you, which is, do you consider yourself a game developer or do you consider yourself a game designer?
Probably both. Sometimes I feel like I have to wear multiple hats at the same time. Someday I'm a designer, someday I'm just a developer who codes and does these like really low level activities. But I think in terms of production, there's multiple phases. There's pre-production, which is more about planning, designing, writing, trying to like visualize this roadmap that you are stepping into when you go to the production phase. So back in 2021, when I had my pre-production phase for Road to Vostok, then I was almost like full-time game designer because I made all those plans and documents and design tools. But currently I'm more of a game developer because I have to do these like manual development tasks on daily basis. So there's not that much designing happening currently. It's more about implementing things.
Now I wanna take a little tangent here and kind of speak a little bit about your background and the fact that you decided to quit your job in order to pursue your dream. And I just want to go back to that day. What was going through your mind the day you decided to quit your job and fully commit to solo game development? Could you guide me through kind of what led to that serious decision, and what should other game developers who are willing to do so consider before going all in?
Are we talking about, because I have kind of like quit 2 careers already for this game, so are we talking about my military career or my game dev teacher career?
When you were a game dev teacher, was the game dev teaching your bread and butter?
Yeah.
Then probably your game dev teaching career for the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was visual game design teacher for 4 years, and I taught over 200 students, and we did probably over 50 game projects during those 4 years. And I was kind of like the lead teacher in terms of graphics, rendering, game engine, and game design. So I had this good position as a career standpoint for that, being the teacher, but every part of me kind of like knew that in some day I will transition to this full-time game entrepreneur, solo game dev. And I have had plans when I would have tried to make that kind of like leap, and there's few aspects that need to happen in order to kind of like feel safe about it. There's the financial side. You can't jump into the void, if you know what I mean. And there's also like the momentum side. For example, I highly suggest that if you are planning to make this leap, you should already have some kind of like production going, or some core vision or some demo, because if you're jumping straight to the quitting your job and doing that pre-production, which is mostly pen and paper, then it's kind of like expensive, because you have to force yourself quickly out of that pre-production in order to kind of like gain attraction. So I wanted to make sure that I had a good game idea. I spent the whole 2021, when I was full-time doing that game teaching job, as nights and evenings, I went through that pre-production phase, did all the design documents and planning, market resource, audience kind of like resource, and that. So I had all those kind of like elements going on. I had the financials; those were good. I had the good momentum with the first devlog, which gained half 500,000 views, and kind of like all pieces kind of like slide into right places. So that was kind of like the signal for me that now it's time to make that leap. But it's different for everyone. But I'm big fan of doing things first as a side job, and then when those pieces slide together, it's more safe, and it's also much more healthier in terms of mental health and when you know that you have a good idea.
Oh wow, that is so interesting. So what you're saying is that this risk that you took was a rather structured risk, something that you told yourself, you know what, if I don't do this, I'm going to regret it. I have
Yeah.
everything planned out. I have everything structured out. I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, it's definitely, you try to minimize that risk as far as you can minimize it, but there's always there's risk in everything, so you just have to like live with the risk. But I think I would have regret if I wouldn't have quit my job, so it was kind of like black and white for me that this is the time to do it.
Oh, that is so interesting. Well, I'm happy you decided to do that.
Yeah, but that was actually much easier leap to make than quitting my military career, because that's whole nother ball game, because you have kind of like, you had all these like contracts, and it's kind of like your whole life is already kind of like planned until you retire in the military. But that was more difficult than that teaching side of things.
So could we actually go to the military side of things then? Could you explain the whole story of how you decided to join the military, and perhaps what you did there and what led you to quit? And as you said, since that was such an important and much more serious change in your life, why was it so, and how did that affect you?
Yeah, I can't cover all the aspects, but I will go through those that I can. In Finland, we have this mandatory conscript service, meaning every 18-year-old male goes to the military. And so I did too, and I found that I had multiple kind of like behavioral elements and things inside me that kind of like fit well with the military. I had this like sport history. I've always been into sports, basketball, some martial arts and so on. So military kind of like felt good to me. And I got a bit excited because I already back in 2012 knew that I want to make this game that I'm currently making, but I wasn't ready for that. So it took me 10 years to get here, but since back in 2012 there wasn't that kind of like big hype in Finland that game career can actually be a career for you. It was kind of like more of like hobby kind of thing. So I had to find another career path because I didn't have those skills yet. So military was kind of like the natural progression for me. And I spent 1 year in that military service. Then I applied to Finnish National Defense University, which is kind of like same that West Point is in USA. So every officer that comes through that pipeline goes there. And so I did 3 years there also. I joined the army as an army lieutenant, and then I spent some time there as an active lieutenant.
Okay.
But yeah, some aspects that you will find in this game are reflected on what I did there, but I don't want to go that much detail.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Let's intrigue us. Wow, that is very impressive. I gotta say, you have a really interesting and impressive career so far, from a military man to a teacher to an entrepreneur and game developer, and in a relatively young age, which is absolutely fascinating. So as you said, would you say that the military experience that you've had played a big role in the decision making of the game, or just some aspects of it, maybe in terms of realism, have made it in? Could you please dive?
Had huge impacts because every kind of like feature and location and kind of like the premise of the game is somewhat, I'm reflecting things that I have experienced in those my military days, meaning I'm not saying it's not that much survival aspects, but when it comes to like how could I say it? Let's just say that there's kind of like these niches that come from the military background. Weapon handling is one of those locations that are based in Finnish abandoned places. I have kind of like visited in most of those. For example, that border zone area, in my military days, we had lots of like training over there and kind of like expeditions, marches, and kind of like the normal stuff that the military does. So it just had huge impacts on what the game currently is trying to build.
Wow. No, to me that sounds not only interesting but exciting to have a game being created with, let's say, first-hand experience and in a location that you have been with experience in those locations, and as you said, experience with weapons is just. I think it's a perfect mix, honestly speaking. So, and a really unique mix at that. Could you just say why was it so difficult, or why was it such more of an important decision to switch from military to teaching?
Yeah,
you didn't mention that.
Because when you go through, basically when army officer graduates in Finland, they kind of like sign a contract with the state, if you will, and it's kind of like your career has been planned many years ahead. What kind of roles are you going to do, and what kind of positions are ahead of you? And if a young officer decides to leave, he kind of like breaks that contract, which is there's a few negative aspects to that. There's financial risks that come from that, and there's also kind of like you may burn some bridges behind you. But luckily, I had this kind of like really small group that was around me, and I I just had to do it. But mentally it was much more difficult because your whole identity has been based around this kind of like military guy, and then you're transitioning to game dev guy, which is kind of like totally different environment to be in. But yeah, it was much difficult choice to make because there's no turning back with that decision. You're kind of like you can't return to your old position.
Wow.
Because if I want to return to the teaching job, that's totally possible. I can probably do that within a year if I would really want to pursue that, but I can't return to that military position, so it's kind of like one-way street.
Wow. That is bittersweet, if you ask me. I didn't realize how important of a decision that was. No regrets, right?
No, absolutely. And also one thing to add that basically every officer candidate, when they are in that military school, your kind of like position is based on your school grades. So you have to really like compete and perform in order to get kind of like good positions. And I had a really good position that I achieved. So that was kind of like difficult to give that away because so many people would like switch to that what I had. So but there have been so many good kind of like perspectives that came from that military experience, because kind of like organization skills, management skills, kind of like stress level handling, all the like mental stuff. So this game dev thing is really easy for me in terms of like actually doing these daily routines and all kinds of stuff. So there has been this military experience has gained me so much, even though I gave it away. So no regrets.
Wow, that is fantastic. And it's definitely visible. A certain attention to detail and importance to information and guidelines is definitely visible in your work. Now let's fast forward to today. Okay, so you quit your job to pursue your dream of creating video games, which, is absolutely fantastic when somebody does that, when they just go all in into the dream that they want to make. And you left a certain stability and entered a journey of ups and downs, quite obviously. Today, your idea has amassed a large following with many content creators and normal gamers absolutely loving your game and playing it and posting videos about it, commenting on all your videos on your socials, and generally quite a positive feedback, including myself. How does that make you feel? And especially, how does that make you feel at this stage of development? Are you feeling more pressured, or are you feeling a breath of fresh air that all of this risk that I went through is worth it?
I'm definitely grateful for that, and it's a privileged position to be in. But in terms of like pressure, I think this is one of those aspects where the military career steps in, because I haven't felt a single pressure or any kind of like negative emotion, even though there are negative things that come from this and there's difficult days, but this is like walk in the park for me, because I have dealt with much more difficult problems, but no pressure. But I think, if I'm being honest, as a kind of like survival game enthusiast, if somebody would present this Road to Vostok idea to me at this stage, I would be kind of like really critical, because if I'm being honest, this is still kind of like that tech demo, small demo phase where there's hundreds of games that have potential and there's good signs that it may be a good game in someday, and Road to Vostok is kind of like in that same narrative still. So personally, I'm quite surprised that I have been able to communicate that well, that people have slowly started to gain trust me as a developer, because that's kind of like hard thing to achieve nowadays.
Absolutely.
But yeah, kind of surprised, but definitely I'm happy that every game developer kind of like dreams this position, that you have a good momentum, the feedback seems to be positive, there's all kinds of like bright aspects of what you're trying to do, and I'm really excited about the next phase of the project, when I'm trying to like break from that mold that this is not a tech demo anymore, because that's kind of like the critical point, to break that just the tech demo phase.
Oh, absolutely. I'm excited about that as well. And I'm actually very happy for you, honestly speaking, from the bottom of my heart, really, because I can imagine your happiness that you go through when you create something and, it's, let's say, not liked, but it's loved by the people that are playing it. Could you say, do you actually watch the videos of your game being played by various YouTubers?
Yeah, I have actually watched probably all of them, meaning hundreds of videos. No matter what the view count is, because.
Oh, nice.
And one aspect that I also want to highlight, that I'm also building this game for myself, because I'm not just trying to put some like financial product to the market. I'm actually trying to build a game that I would like to play as a fan of Stalker, as a fan of Daisy, as a fan of Escape from Tarkov, as a fan of Project Zomboid. So I'm definitely interested about what the others are saying as well, but I'm also kind of like keeping this kind of like straight vision in order to make that game that I want to play as well. So I'm not just looking at those videos in sense that what kind of feedback I'm getting, but also kind of like trying to reflect that is this my vision that this person is also trying to kind of like experience. So that's I think one key aspect from indie developers is to avoid this feature creep and deviation from the original vision. And Road to Vostok is definitely can be deviated to so many directions. Many people are asking multiplayers, many people are asking wildlife, zombies, all kinds of like exotic ideas. So my job is to kind of like keep this ship at its right course, in sense of like what's the true vision for this game.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm pretty sure it's not the easiest thing to keep it like that. I say this, why do I say this? Is because I don't remember exactly on which post, but I've seen you posted something, I think recently on Instagram, I believe. And one user said, "Is it multiplayer?" And the other one answered, "Yeah, it's fully multiplayer."
Yeah.
And the other guy said like, "Okay," or something like that. I didn't intervene. I don't want to ruin the momentum, but definitely, it's your mission is true to keep the information out there, exactly what the game is and exactly what your vision is, and it's not easy for sure.
It's not, and I can also say that I'm still learning about this like I don't consider myself as a content creator, or even though I am, but I don't consider that I am. But I have definitely learning this as I go, because I remember when I first posted that first YouTube video, which got 500,000 views as first video, I wasn't that prepared for having thousands of comments and hundreds of emails, because, for example, if somebody said something negative about the game, kind of like my military background kicked in and I was going this full defend mode, and I have to argue and kind of like explain why he's wrong, and then slowly over time I'm kind of like understanding of how I should react or not to react in some cases, and also reading every single thing that has been written about you is not always that wise, because there's all kinds of feedback, and I totally understand that. Like I mentioned, it's hard to trust these projects nowadays in survival genre, but it's also pretty wise as a developer that you kind of like sometimes you don't look at everything, because some discussions can turn pretty nasty and you can get all kinds of emails that kind of can ruin your day. And I personally made this mistake from early on, that I have been using kind of my private email, and once I used it once, it has been used in all kinds of scenarios. So it has been a kind of like learning curve for me, for sure, as a content creator.
Oh, definitely. You're completely exiting out of your comfort zone into a territory that you really don't know. And you know what they say, haters are going to hate. And don't be discouraged by that, for sure. I'm pretty sure there's more positive comments than negative, right?
Yeah, sure.
Thank God. That's the most important
and like
thing.
mentioned, I'm not that type of guy who gets really easily kind of like distracted, or my mood or momentum or motivation is really hard to break. So I'm not worried about that, but it was fun when I remember when I had those first days when that video released. I was kind of like arguing in the comments that this is why I'm wrong, and this is why I'm right, you're wrong, and that all kind of like stupid stuff, but I'm learning.
I think all content creators go through that learning curve, for sure.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
And all kinds of like, really like, for example, in terms of email, I haven't had an experience where you get over 100 emails a day. Some days might be like that. How you deal with that? So I have to kind of like force myself to learn all this, like how to survive with this information flood, because I hadn't had any experience in terms of like email filters. I had no idea how to kind of like filter different kind of emails. So there's so much involved with this kind of like being a full-time developer. It's not just developing the game, it's also kind of like trying to survive with all these different mediums, forums, information that comes from you.
No, for sure. Yeah, you definitely need to keep under control all angles of your socials, your email, your messaging. Yeah, it's definitely not easy. The emails that you're saying you're getting, first of all, I'm happy that I got through. So thank you for that. But are you getting mostly emails from players, or are, I don't know, magazines or other YouTubers contacting you as well with comments and advice?
Yeah, it's all that. Like I said, I made the mistake that I used this one email address for all. So I'm now at the situation where I read every email, because there might be something important, but I can't answer to everything. But there's all kinds of like approaches that there might be some who are applying for a job. There might be somebody who is trying to get help in development sense. There's some media stuff, and then there's just feedback box, or maybe some partner ideas or something. So it's kind of like a mixed thing.
Okay. Well, it's good to know that some opportunities are posing themselves out there for you, for sure. That's amazing.
Yeah, and
despite the
people
negative comments.
also sometimes forget that when you're working as a full-time developer, you are also a game entrepreneur, and there's a whole kind of like business side of things that nobody talks about. Just accounting, having abroad contractors, you have to pay withhold taxes to different countries, and all kinds of like nuanced stuff that nobody talks about. So there's been a huge learning curve also for me to like learning how to run a game studio, even though it's a small studio, but still it's a business that you have to take care with.
And nonetheless, it's a studio producing an experience for players. Speaking about that, I was going to ask you a follow-up question that is related to this. Could you tell me about the day that was the most difficult for you throughout the development process of Road to Vostok? Was it maybe the, let's say, company registration? Was it like you said, the accounting? Did you have to learn all that? Did you need advice from the notary office, for example? Was it something new to you, or were you somewhat knowledgeable about these aspects and you can maintain them more or less easily?
Yeah, I definitely had prior experience. When I was back in the military, I also have this kind of like web design, web programming side job that a small business that I founded, and basically I made websites for people. And through that I have had this prior experience of kind of like invoicing and doing this basic small company stuff. But in terms of like really knowing how to run a business, I from early on I decided that I need some kind of mentor, and that's really huge thing. That could be a difference and night and day. So I have had the privilege to work with one Finnish mentor who has probably plus 20 years more experience than me. He has seen and experienced all the negatives, all the positives. So without that mentor, there would be definitely situations where I would have kind of like screwed some aspects already. So my suggestion is, if somebody is kind of like learning from scratch, that you don't have to learn everything by yourself. There's always more kind of like experienced person than you. You just got to have the knowledge how to find those and how to build those relationships. So that has been huge for this project and me.
Oh, that's actually very interesting, the fact that you mentioned a mentor. I think that's definitely very good advice. Not easy to find, but if you do have one, then definitely it's a big positive for sure.
Yeah, and it's really important, even though the mentor is kind of like this professional word, but it doesn't have to be kind of like this guru. It just have to be a person who has a kind of like bird's eye view, because you're on the trenches all the time. You're working, your eyes glued to the monitor, and you're kind of like putting down these fires on a daily basis. So you need some kind of person who's not involved in that and who can say and comment things kind of like on upper level. So that's really valuable if you can have that kind of like person with you.
Yeah, definitely. I could definitely agree with that. If we're going to switch a little bit our concentration towards the gameplay for Road to Vostok, I really enjoyed the devlog where you mentioned scavenging.
Yep.
When you said the word scavenging, I was all eyes and ears. And what's really caught my attention was when you spoke about the fact that DayZ started with that specific scavenging concept. And by that concept, I'm going to probably briefly explain it. If you want, you can explain it a bit more in depth. But instead of entering a house and kind of seeing certain items being spawned in predetermined locations, what we're talking about here is items being spawned randomly in unpredetermined locations, like for example, under the chair, behind the cupboard, and in various different locations, which will allow players to, or let players explore more and not just enter and exit certain buildings. And as you've also mentioned, some players might get in, loot the place up, miss a couple of things, and another player can get in and actually find those things. So it creates a really interesting dynamic in the game, something that I really enjoy as a survival games enthusiast. However, you mentioned that DayZ sort of left that route because it seemed a bit, I wouldn't say difficult for players, but perhaps time consuming. And they decided to go with the route that they're going with today, which is, you go into the house and everything's, let's say, on top of the furniture, more or less. And you even showcased some interesting examples of that with some screenshots. Do you think that this could be a factor for Road to Vostok as well? That players might see this as a, let's say, boring, in quotes, thing to do in the game? Or perhaps are you targeting a specific niche of players who would enjoy this?
I think many of my design decisions when it comes to these gameplay mechanics are tied to replayability and this single player kind of like trap where the game kind of like repeats itself. So I'm trying to design mechanics that break that mold of kind of like repeating itself. So this specific physical based loot system that you're referring is one of those kind of like ways why I try to innovate some aspects that I find annoying in DayZ, where it's kind of like unfulfilling when you enter a room and there's a kind of like in the middle of the floor, totally obvious place that there's some loot just laying there. There's no scavenging involved. So to be honest, even though I have done numerous of tests of how this system works, and I believe that it will be a good thing, but there hasn't been that a full kind of like gameplay loop experience yet. Even me as a developer, I haven't fully experienced what the Road to Vostok will feel like when it's ready. So some features and mechanics definitely need to be tuned and balanced, but I'm still try to make these kind of like new ideas and kind of like innovate a little bit, because I think there's a room for innovation in this genre. So, but if I answer your question honestly, even I don't know what feature is actually kind of like bulletproof and works, because the game isn't there yet. The first kind of like glimpse of the game loop will be this fall when the public demo 2 comes out. But I'm pretty confident that that looting system, that physically based loot scattering, will be one of those things that with some balancing, it will provide better experience, for example, than DayZ.
Yeah, if I am just to voice my opinion, I definitely agree with you. I think that, actually fighting for the resources, trying to look for them is really, really interesting. And as you mentioned, perhaps you might forget something and another person might get it. That's an advantage for the, let's say, new spawn, for example. And honestly, I think, as you said, I personally haven't played any sort of mechanic of the sorts, and I would be definitely interested to test it out whenever it comes out. Definitely excited about that.
And one addition to that also, if I can mention, is that because there's just me working on the game, I kind of have to be strategic about the map sizes. So having these systems that kind of like require more time spending on smaller areas, because you have to find and spend time on finding those items, it kind of like gives me some possibility to make smaller maps. For example, if the time spent on per building, for example, is a little bit longer, because for example in DayZ you can basically speedrun all the buildings because you knew the loot places, so you progress really fast with the map. But in Road to Vostok, I kind of want the opposite, that you are kind of like those buildings should kind of be like time sinks, for example, because then you are spending more time finding the items, opening all the kind of like logical loot cabinets and stuff, so the whole map doesn't have to be so massive, if you know what I tried to mean with this.
I definitely understand what you're trying to say, for sure. And I think it's definitely an interesting approach. And as you said too, you're gonna, let's say, shrink the size of the map, but increase the interactability of the map, which in my book is absolutely fantastic. And I think it's gonna be, or I think it is a great decision. Continuing to speak about the gameplay, you mentioned the feature of a weapons trader, which is very, very interesting. But you kind of mentioned him, just like, hey, there's a weapons trader. Could you dive deeper into the weapons trader and explain how he's going to work? Will there be perhaps different traders with different loot? Or is there going to be one trader with different tier loot that you're going to have to find? Will the player know where the trader is, or do we have to somehow find him? What do we trade with them? Is there a currency? Basically, what's the whole gameplay, let's say gameplay mechanic for the trader, which is very, very interesting for me to know.
Yeah, I've been really quiet about these topics previously, but now when the game is slowly progressing to this point where these things come relevant, I'm definitely open to talk about this, and I'm also kind of like, I need to update my website because there's so much information that's going to be relevant really soon. For example, all the trader info. But the basic idea of traders is going to be this kind of like multiple different genre of traders. There's going to be medical specific characters. There's going to be weapon specific characters. There's going to be kind of like generalist who runs a kind of like common shop in the game world, and there's kind of like low tier items there. There's going to be kind of like really remote wilderness driven guy called shaman, who's kind of like this more folk type of dude, and every trader has totally different kind of gear that he can provide and trade. But I think one really important aspect is that do you know how well the Escape from Tarkov, how it approaches traders and flea market?
Yeah, of course. I've played Escape from Tarkov. I know.
Yeah,
I'm not the best player, but I know the whole game mechanic. Definitely.
Yeah, my kind of like, this is one of those when I talk that I have this important role of keeping the vision in a certain sense. So I want to go totally different route than Tarkov in terms of like item progression, because I don't like the idea of having a flea market. I don't like the idea that the money and the currency is kind of like your main focus of the game. For example, in Road to Vostok, there won't be any kind of like currency. Everything is done through bartering. For example, there's going to be trade value per item, but there's not going to be money making in sense that, for example, in Tarkov, your whole idea why you're running a shelter is to make money, and everything kind of like runs around the money idea. And I think that kind of like devaluates the gear and loot that you are having if you can just buy it everywhere when you need it. So this, of course, Tarkov is totally different kind of game. It approaches the shooter aspect more than the survival aspect. But I want to take total different approach, that there's going to be a huge number of items that you can't buy anywhere, you can trade them anywhere, you just have to find and earn them. And the money is going to be kind of like side thing, because I want the trading to be more like bartering. When you, for example, it's also immersion thing. If you kind of like try to imagine a post-apocalyptic scenario, nobody wouldn't use money. It doesn't have any value. All the value is kind of like hidden in the utility items. For example, toilet paper can be really valuable, or something like a tobacco thing can be really valuable. So I think it makes more sense that the value itself should be in the items, not in the currency.
That is so interesting. You've intrigued me so much right now. The fact that you say it's the utility value just really nails it and makes sense in the game. Am I correct in understanding that such a scenario would be possible? I could walk around in the map and perhaps find one good weapon, let's say a sniper, a Mosin, that I want to keep to myself. And then I could find accidentally another Mosin of exactly the same type and use that Mosin to then barter with a trader. Or are weapons more of a unique kind of thing that you have only one of? Is it more of, like you said, toilet paper or tobacco or stuff like that you could trade?
There's definitely going to be weapon trading as well. And in terms of like weapons, I'm going to take inspiration from Stalker, which has this kind of like weapon conditioning. For example, if you kill NPCs and AI, they will drop their weapon, but it may be really low conditioned one, and you have to maintain and kind of like polish it up to being kind of like reliable, and then it has more trade value through that. So I'm kind of like mimicking how the Stalker deals with trading in terms of like weapons.
Oh, that is amazing. You know what this reminds me of? I don't know if you played this game, but a game called Kenshi.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time playing that game, and when you speak about bartering and trading like that, it kind of reminds me of Kenshi, and that's a wonderful game. And if there's going to be any sort of essence of that type of trading, like you said, from a fallen enemy, that's, I think, absolutely awesome and interesting. So that's really, really cool. Wow. Thank you for this information.
Yeah, and these are one of the reasons why I'm excited about the near future of this game, because currently, like mentioned, this is kind of like a shooter tech demo. Nothing more, nothing less, and even though it does some good things with the shooting, but there's going to be so much kind of like emphasis on other aspects of the game as well, and like this bartering system and how I'm going to approach the looting and trading. So I'm really excited that when those features and mechanics are implemented, then we start to talk more about what this game is really trying to be, because I'm not building just a shooter game.
Wow. No, that's really, really awesome. And I think the more I speak to you about this game, the more I realize what a grand vision you have. When you say that right now it's just a tech demo of a shooter, I kind of realize, I'm like, you know what? It actually is, and yet it's so amazing. And with the release of future demos and the final game itself, I can only imagine how interesting it's going to be. Wow.
Yeah, I think there's going to be multiple kind of like events through the this year and next year where people are going to see, oh, this isn't just a generic one of those games anymore, and it just needs a little more time, because I'm still building the core mechanics, which is movement, looting, shooting, and there hasn't been that innovation hasn't yet put into the game, but I'm slowly starting to push those. For example, the next devlog will the emphasis will be around the shelter and save system, and I think I have kind of like good vision how the shelter should act in a interactive way, because for example in Tarkov your shelter is money-making machine. There's no interactivity. You cannot decorate, you cannot place your loot stash, props, you cannot, it's pretty limited, and many survival games use this stick rock approach, where building these kind of like really weird shacks in the middle of field and doing this kind of like medieval stuff, which is kind of weird, because I think in post-apocalypse scenario, the shelter should be kind of like rooted in the environments, already built an infrastructure, and you should have the ability to interact them in any way, meaning you should place your gear wherever you want and it should save there. You should have the ability to decorate them, and all this kind of like what prepper culture, for example, is really important to implement in a games like these, that you can really prep, plan, and kind of have also these bragging rights in terms of the loot that you achieve. I want that there's all kinds of like weapon walls where you can put your weapons manually to the wall, and it's kind of like spotlights are on it, and all kinds of things like this I think are important in survival games.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I was going to actually quote you from your Instagram post about the storage system right now, but you beat me to it. That's an interesting aspect of the game. That's a whole, let's say, I wouldn't say religion, but a whole kind of, let's say game mechanic that is loved by many, many gamers. And to see you concentrate on that and to give it such attention, I think that, says a lot about the game for sure. That's really, really good. I was going to ask you another question that interested me personally. You were talking about the pre-production phase of Road to Vostok, and you mentioned that you chose an abandoned Soviet radar-based location that is located in Latvia called Skrunda 1, if I'm correct.
Yep.
As your prototype location. How did that location pop onto your radar? No pun intended there. And are we going to see Skrunda 1 in the final game? I asked this because, I checked what the place is. It looks awesome. It looks, abandoned and post-apocalyptic, and it would be an interesting location perhaps for players to roam around in.
Yeah. The the first part of the question, where did I get the idea?
Yeah.
Like mentioned, I've been this kind of like survival game enthusiast through all my years, and I'm really into these kind of like urban exploration and kind of like these ruined environments. I don't know what there is that kind of like intrigues me, but there's something that I like. For example, all the kind of like abandoned cities in Pripyat and all those kind of like stalker side elements. I really, there's something that draws me to those locations, and in Finland we have also lots of those because we have a military history and we have lots of like abandoned military sites, and the whole border zone premise is based on those abandoned locations and bunkers and all kinds of things. So I have done lots of research of what kind of like old military sites there is in Europe, and the Skrunda one is one of those legendary places which kind of like has some kind of same taste than in Pripyat and all those locations. So it was
Definitely,
kind of, and also in terms of like size, it kind of like fits well what the final map size of Road to Vostok maps will be, and in terms of the current situation, when this kind of like has to be, I have to go a little bit deep in some of my production things, but for example, I make all my 3D models based on photo textures, which means that I travel to real locations, take pictures, and transfer those or convert those into 3D models. And when one side of my game is in Finland, I get really easily Finnish textures and photos because I live here. But the other side is in Russia, and that's no-go for me at this day. So there has to be some kind of like plan of how I can implement similar kind of buildings and similar kind of textures without going across the border. And with all the Soviet history and stuff, there's lots of kind of like similar architecture across the Baltic. And for example, Skrunda one is one of those that could be. I've actually all kinds of assets made from that location, so you will definitely see some Skrunda one themed assets in Vostok side of the game world. But you will see some asset from there. But the Vostok
really
side definitely needs more kind of like imagination, because even though those places are also, they are rooted in reality, but they have to be kind of slightly fantasy based also, because I can't go there and kind of like really take all the photo textures. So I'm taking inspiration from all across kind of like old Soviet stuff. So Skrunda one fits in that category.
Oh, definitely, it fits for sure. I'm happy to hear that parts of that abandoned base would be present in the final game, because it does look absolutely interesting and fantastic, and like you said, very close to Pripyat, which is right on point.
I have actually made all the Skrunda one, or actually I have made some of those, and also I have one contractor who has modeled the entire Skrunda one, every building, chimneys, water towers, all those. So I have basically all the assets that would be needed to make the whole Skrunda one, but I'm going to use those assets kind of like strategically. For example, I may use the abandoned apartment buildings in some Vostok's map, so they will be scattered across the Vostok side.
So continuing to speak about the game and its locations and lore, could you please tell me what was the inspiration behind the actual lore of the game? In one of your devlogs, you mentioned the really interesting village story to kind of describe the general scenario and the feeling of the location, which was very interesting, and the pictures used were absolutely amazing. And it really gave a perfect feel and understanding to the viewer as to what you're trying to convey. Will there be an A to Z story that a player could uncover, or is it something more, not open world, but let's say an open-ended quest, more or less? Could you please dive into that?
Yeah, I'm not ready to reveal the lore yet, but it's definitely, this is one of those topics that will be what I did in the military, that will be linked to this game's lore. And the lore will be provided in a way that there's going to be first lore-related video this summer, and even though I'm kind of explaining what happened in the border zone, you wouldn't probably still quite understand it, because I want that the lore is something that you really have to kind of like uncover, and it will need multiple different kind of like skills to understand what really happened in terms of like, for example,
Wow.
In terms of military, there's so many professions that some branch may be involved in really specific technical activities. Some may be involved in totally different kind of things. So I don't see that a normal player wouldn't maybe understand it by itself, but if there's a group of people somewhere in the future that has kind of like multiple expertise, they can, for example, as a group to figure out what happened. So it will need kind of like different pieces of puzzle. And I'm big fan of this kind of like, there's all kinds of like these mysteries and riddle videos on YouTube, all kinds of like, which are frequency-based mysteries and number stations and all those kind of like dark, mysterious, secret things. So Road to Vostok will have one of those kind of things, but it's really hard to understand by yourself, and you will probably need some help. And for example, I really like that in Daisy there was this kind of like Green Mountain, which was this kind of like all kinds of rumors and things were around it, that is it some kind of like, is there a secret message? And even though there maybe wasn't, but there was still this kind of like community effort to try to find out if you go in there, for example, in the middle of the night and use special kind of items, is there some kind of like audio effect? So I want to implement those kind of things in a mass scale. And in terms of lore, my game design document has probably over 20 pages of that written. So there's map-specific lore elements, there's character and trader-specific lore elements, but how I want to present those is kind of like optional, because I want to have this kind of like sandbox main mentality. For example, in Stalker Anomaly, even though there's a main lore, you have to reach the nuclear station. That's not the main point of the game. You kind of like design the world how you want to play it. So I want to do it similar way, that there's no main task line that you have to obey. You can do different kind of tasks in however you want. There's going to be procedural tasks, which are going to be different in each game playthrough, but there's going to be some lore-related tasks. But let's just say that I'm trying to make a lore that is difficult to comprehend.
That is so cool. To be honest, you're speaking a little bit like Hideo Kojima right now, with all his mysteries and secrets in his game, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I want that there's going to be some initial hook and goal for the game, but my kind of like ideal situation for the lore is that maybe even though there's going to be multiple lore videos, there's going to be probably early access games in near, or early access version in near years, but I want that maybe even within 5 years, there's still a part of the lore that hasn't fully been revealed yet.
Wow. Whoa, that's a big challenge.
Yeah.
That's a big that you're undertaking, actually, because players are pretty good at solving all these mysteries. Wow, that's so exciting. My goodness.
I have actually been in part of those groups that have tried to like solve some of the things in other games, and not just games, just if we are talking in real life stuff also, if we are talking some frequency based mysteries or radars and such. So I have pretty extensive experience in solving these things, so I want to implement something that is also really difficult to solve.
Oh wow, this is that is really, really cool. I think that's such an, I mean, you wouldn't call those Easter eggs, but like let's say side quests and mysteries that communities together have to solve.
Yeah, and I also think that when you're developing a single player game, you can also kind of have this like multiplayer like elements in a game, even though there's no online connection. For example, if there's online communities that are trying to solve something together, I see that as a multiplayer thing, almost like, because there's multiple people working in a single player game, kind of. So I want to develop these kind of things also in a sense that it kind of unites the people and the community in some way.
Wow, that
this
is
is
thrilling.
what I'm
honestly.
excited about, because we are now seeing just that core surface of that small shooter tech demo, but in the near future, people are going to really see that, oh, this is something different.
Well, even now we see hints of, like, I wouldn't say even hints. I would say like the beginnings of
Yeah.
such things with your little Easter eggs in the game, with the notes that you placed with the Mosin, and the notes that you placed with the bean cans. Those little things already kind of say what type of a developer you are. And now when you tell me that you have that plant times 100, I can only imagine what's going to happen in the real game. So, continuing the subject of mystery, you have mentioned that Road to Vostok will not have any fantasy elements in it. However, you did mention that it will have mysteries, like you said, and you also mentioned dynamic events that will make the player feel unsafe, and especially at night. That's very intriguing and very interesting. Could you please tease us all as to what we can expect as those dynamic events?
Yeah, there's going to be multiple kind of like layers at what kind of dynamic events. There's going to be map-specific dynamic events, and there's going to be whole game world-based dynamic events. But I think one aspect that I must have to implement in some ways, this kind of like surprise element, that when you play the game, there's that it doesn't repeat itself. So those dynamic events are meant to break that kind of like devious loop of repeating. So I think have you played Stalker?
Yeah, a while
do
back.
you know the concept of emissions, for example? Those kind of like storms in where the sky turns red,
Yeah.
and those type of things.
Of course, yeah, for sure.
I see that that is one kind of example of dynamic event, but that's fantasy based. But that's
I
still
see.
kind of like happens in the whole game world. But I want to implement something similar, but not fantasy
Okay.
type of stuff.
Ooh,
So,
that is interesting.
for example, if you think about in real life, what could be something similar? For example, in every country, there's these kind of like air raid sirens and all this kind of like noise-based dynamic events that might happen. You might need to seek shelter. There's all kinds of like environmental, weather-based dynamic events that might need you to adjust how you play the game. So even though there's there isn't fantasy elements, there's still a lot of room to design events that will kind of like force you to take some kind of action dynamically.
Wow. You revealed it without revealing it, and I'm still excited.
Yeah.
That is really cool. So will these dynamic events, they will occur in Area 05 or in Vostok or in the border zone, or they can happen everywhere?
Everywhere. And there's also AI-based dynamic events. So, for example, one thing that is designed in the game is kind of like these delivery trucks, which are linked to the whole trader ecosystem. For example, there's this one general store is in the one map, and there's going to be this truck delivery, which happens in one map called Highway. And for example, that truck might occur randomly at some point, delivering supplies for that store. And if you destroy that truck and steal the supplies, then it doesn't resupply the store, and then the store has a lower amount of items. And so you can modify the game world if you decide to play this like aggressive style, but then your trading economy kind of like collapses and so on. So those kind of like dynamic events.
You just blew my mind. And so let's say, for example, if one does play aggressive and destroys this truck, does it respawn anytime later, or is it perma death?
That store gets supplied in multiple ways. There's going to be sea-based also supplies, but if you destroy that truck, it doesn't respawn. So that's kind of like permanent for that truck.
Wow. So it's a decision that players have to make, either to get everything once or wait a little bit and get a little bit many times.
Yeah. And I'm also this hardcore element will be presented in multiple elements. For example, if you shoot one of the traders, it will actually kill him and he doesn't come back. So you can basically kill all the economy in terms of trading and modify your gameplay in a total different way.
Wow, that is that is really, really interesting. You really thought this whole thing through. Again, this reminds me of certain aspects of Kenshi, this permadeath of the sellers and everything. And yeah, what's interesting is that each player can kind of be whoever they want to be, and the world is their oyster there. Basically, they can actually change the way things work.
Yeah, and for another example, there's so many of these, but did you happen to see one of those, I think it was the public demo 1 video where there was this kind of like jet flying by?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I've even seen it in gameplay of other YouTubers as well.
Yeah, okay. Now, for example, that jet can be shot down if you have the proper items, and when it flies, it crashes into some of the other maps that are more towards the east, because it flies towards the east, and then there's basically dynamic crash site if you shot that jet down, which will spawn loot and so on. So those are kind of like those dynamic events.
Wow, this is very interesting. Are there going to be achievements for stuff like that?
There's going to be challenges and patches that are tied to kind of like, I don't know if you're into weapons and gear and such, but for example, people, myself included, who like these kind of like tactical gear and stuff, you have this kind of like rigs and gear that have this kind of like Velcro thing where you can put your patches. So these achievements will be provided to you with in-game patches, which, for example, if you survive the winter mode, you get a winter themed patch, and you can actually place it in-game item. For example, if your backpack has a Velcro, you can put the 3D patch to that backpack, and again, you get those bragging rights to see that, oh, this guy have survived 100 days in the winter mode or something.
Wow. That is so cool. That is quite unique. My goodness. There's
And
so much more that we still haven't seen.
12 patches has been decided, but those are not yet to be implemented, since I'm still working on these core mechanics, but in the future, people will see these that, oh, there's a lot more than these shooter things.
Wow. My next question was actually about the patrol helicopters and if we could interact with them, but you basically kind of answered the question, and I assume the patrol helicopters are also interactable, right? Okay. So you could shoot them down with the specific equipment and then kind of see what loot spawns from their crash.
Yeah, but those helicopters, which are mostly tied to that border zone and crossing points, my main kind of like design vision for the border zone is that it's something that where you should really keep low profile in order to kind of like survive. So if you are trying to shoot those down, you are going to be pretty screwed, because that whole premise of the border zone is designed around that you kind of like have to sneak your way through to the Vostok. So, but yeah, those can be shot down in the future.
Just a quick question regarding sneaking. So there's going to be some sort of a sneak mechanic, right? Like if you crouch down, you'll make less noise, and stealth kills and stuff like that.
I would say the emphasis will be on kind of like, there's also now multiple elements to this topic, but for example, most games use this kind of like raycast-based player detection, which means that the AI sends an invisible beam, which kind of like detects if it hits the player in certain kind of like area. And that's kind of like problematic, because it can hit all kinds of trees, and it can... basically, the AI doesn't have eyes like we humans do. So I want to kind of like in the future do whole another sensor type of thing for the AI, which is based on actually taking pictures of the game world. For example, if I go a little bit through this, the first phase of the AI detection in the future will be based on that raycast, but if it detects the player, then the next phase will be it will take a small 256 times 256 pixel screenshot of the kind of like detection spot, and it will kind of like look the player with the environment, and there's kind of like color threshold. For example, if the player wears camo clothing, olive green clothing, which kind of like blends with the environment, then the threshold is much more lower, and then the detection might not happen. So the sneaking will be mostly about what kind of clothes you use. Does your weapon, how shiny it is, because that small screenshot thing, it can be used in so many ways that it actually kind of like sees how the player stands out from the environment.
Wow, this is
And I have actually
really
demonstrated this
interesting.
in one of my videos if you want to see it.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
If I'm correct, it's the one where the player is highlighted in red and he's behind
Yeah.
like a Christmas tree,
Yeah.
a pine tree.
Yeah, that's the one.
I've seen that. Yeah, definitely. But what I didn't realize is that the camouflage, or maybe I didn't hear it, is that the camouflage is actually going to play an effect on that. That's really cool. And the shininess of the weapon. So if the weapon is damaged, it's less shiny. Thus, it's a bit better for sneaking.
Yeah,
Or you can.
because basically those are just like numeric values in the game engine. You have this kind of like specular values, and also, so if you're holding all kind of like metallic gear and you have all these bright clothes, those are really easy to detect from that kind of like systems perspective. But these are features that will be implemented not this year, maybe not even next year, but those are those innovations that this game is going to take at some point.
It's basically in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Eventually, it's gonna. That's really, really interesting. So, just continuing speaking about the character. Who is the main character? If you can tell us any information, do they have a name, or is it going to be a character that we're going to create? Is it going to be a character customization menu, or perhaps is just going to be a default male and female, what we see commonly nowadays?
I don't want to kind of like put the player in somebody's shoes that already exists, so it's going to be totally the character will form the way you play. For example, if you like to play this kind of like wilderness type of guy, you can use the most remote shelters in the game world. Your clothing can be totally leather based and this kind of like really scuffed clothing. But if somebody wants to play more like tactical operator way, it can use more like common buildings and kind of like use clothes that would fit more like a military personnel or something like that. So I want that the kind of like your character is a platform and you can decide however you want to play it. But I'm not. There's going to be a clothing system in sense that you can see the preview and the arm textures and gloves and those will change, but I'm not going to go that deep because you still have to remember that this is an indie project, so I have to kind of like find these middle grounds, what's wise in terms of time. I definitely wait that when this game gets to that point that people are starting to see that kind of like what this game really is. Like mentioned multiple times that sometimes it's really hard to like kind of like leave this because people see just the fraction of what the game is actually going to be. But I'm really excited about the fall, the public demo 2, and the next year from that, because I have kind of like seen how much I can do within a year. Because if I compare the last September's public demo 1 to this, which is going to be public demo 2, I know exactly how much progress I can make in a 1 year time of period. So I can pretty well calculate on when the game gets into that phase that people are really going to see those kind of like impressive features, if you say it. So I think it will need maybe 1 year more, but it will definitely get there.
I'm sure about it. And we'll be eagerly waiting for all that to happen and supporting you all the way. Could you just explain why is Area 05 called Area 05? Is there some sort of a meaning for that?
Yeah, I try to kind of like translate this because it would be so easy to explain in Finnish, but
right.
I don't know if every other country has this, but do you have this kind of like, let's say 20 years back, 10 years back, every kind of like part of the country was divided into these kind of like operational numbers, meaning the landlines needed kind of like few digit numbers at first based on where you lived. For example, if you lived in some parts, it could be like 06 slash something, or like that. So Finland basically was kind of like categorized in different regions, and each region has that 2-digit kind of like operation number for the telephones. So 05 was that number for the eastern kind of like region near the Russian border.
Speaking of the the sound design of the game, it appears to be extremely atmospheric and very very immersive, and I'm sure you've taken a lot of time and attention to the sound design because obviously it's an important part of the game. Could you share some of your insights into how you approach this process?
The audio plays a huge role, but to be honest, the current audio is mostly placeholder because there hasn't been that much design for it at all. Mostly just what's the most minimal viable product currently. Only actual design that has been for the weapon audio. There has been designs how to implement all the specific caliber tails and sounds and reverb, but the actual atmospheric sounds and sound effects are totally placeholder because I don't have time yet to fully design actual systems and blendings to those. There's few details where I made some progress. For example, I implemented this ambient zone thing that when you go inside the buildings, there's certain kind of effects that happen to the atmospheric sound. For example, the rain sounds different and so on. But in terms of actually designing that audio and how the player feels and what kind of audio is in different maps, there hasn't been any development time put into that yet. But it's glad to hear that you find that immersive still, even though there's no time put into it yet.
That's really surprising for me because, spending time playing the game, I mean, I completely immersed and the sound was so good. And just knowing now that you're going to make it even better, I mean...
it's just bare bones now.
Wow. By making it even better, do you mean you're going to actually, for example, go out into the forest and actually take a sample of the sound? Or is there an engineering process in that involved?
I think most of the audio stuff will be outsourced because that's kind of it's expensive to buy all those good gear. Audio is really kind of like gear dependent in some sense because when you're recording nature ambiences and such, a small pocket-sized stereo mic isn't enough. You need specific kind of equipment for specific type of sounds. You need shotgun mics. You need different kind of mics for weapons, different kind of mics for Foley sounds. So it's not wise for me to invest. And also I don't have the passion for actually recording the sound. So that will be something that I will be outsourcing. But I have a great contractor that will be hired for that specific role full-time when I have the resource for that.
Wow. And just regarding the gunshots, are those, you said you improved them currently, but are they still placeholder and they're going to get better? Or for the moment, the gunshots are legit and the way you like them?
The actual gunshot files are legit and they will be used, but there's still plenty of room to improve those because there's all kinds of like in-engine audio mixers and stuff and frequency-based EQ stuff that can be done, and there's also directional improvements, meaning you could hear more specifically where the shots have been come from, and all kinds of like satisfying elements that make the shooting more immersive and so on. But the actual files are those have been recorded from real guns, most of them. So those will remain, but they will be enhanced with other sounds and design stuff.
I've also noticed in your devlogs, you've mentioned that you experimented with different visual styles for the game. And you've showed a couple of screenshots, and one of those screenshots really caught my eye, which was the isometric kind of 1.5D design of the game, sort of like Project Zomboid. Could you please take me through your thought process of why you didn't go that route? Why was a first-person perspective better for you, a better choice for you in developing this game?
Yeah, and even though we talk about this, how I transitioned to game dev, it's also good to remember that I've been making games since 2012. So 10 years of game development before this project, so I have numerous of prototypes and experiments and other survival stuff that I've been tested through the years. And for example, Project Zomboid has been one of my main inspiration games, so definitely there have been experiments with the 3D isometric views. And also there's things like, I don't know if you heard a game called Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead, CDDA.
Fortunately, no.
That's more of like roguelike ASCII type of survival game. That's really in-depth hardcore game. So there have been experiments with that kind of style also. I made top-down kind of games in a survival.
Completely top-down, bird's eye view.
Yeah, 2D
Okay.
top-down. Actually, no, it's kind of like not top-down. It's 3/4 perspective, so kind of a little tilted. But yeah.
Okay.
And in terms of what I did with that isometric 3D 2D.5 style of game, I developed it quite far actually. It was fully playable. It had all the like core gameplay loop elements going on. But the main kind of like selling point for that idea is that I was testing this kind of like rotating camera perspective. For example, the camera rotated 45 degrees with the Q and E, so it seemed isometric 2.5D, but it was actually fully 3D world, and you could switch the perspectives and so on. But each perspective looked isometric. You just kind of like twisted 4 different perspectives. But for me, why I decided to go fully with 3D, I would say most games that I spent the most amount of time in my kind of like gaming career have been 3D, DayZ, Stalker, Tarkov, all kinds of other survival games. So it's definitely the freedom aspect of it, and also it's professional aspect because I like to make 3D. I enjoy the 3D modeling process. I find that making 3D UVs and textures is kind of like therapeutic in a sense, and also this photo texture ideology of mine, where I go to real world and find those textures. I think it's kind of like important that game developers don't just sit on the computers. They need to kind of like do something else as well. So it kind of fits these all my ideas that I want to do. So the 3D is kind of like must have.
Okay, yeah, I would agree with you on that. But as a fan of Project Zomboid, when I saw that screenshot, it looked so tasty. It looked so good. I was like, I wish I could just also play that prototype a little bit. It looked really good.
And also, to be honest, one aspect, because this game entrepreneurship perspective is that nobody ever talks about this, because when I did that pre-production phase and market research and target audience research, it's also a kind of like business decision, because if you would go this huge, because Road to Vostok type of game is like, it's almost like lifelong career decision. If you're really trying to make one of the best survival games out there, you have to be kind of like, you are really committed to it. So it would be kind of twisted that if I'm committing my career to something that may not even had the player base and the market to sustain it in a really full career in a fashion, if you know what I mean. So
no, I understand, definitely.
There's clear indicators in the market that 3D survival games tend to perform better in terms of like how they sell, what kind of like titles there are. So even though Project Zomboid is a wonderful game, it's one of the best survival games easily in terms of mechanics. There's so many things good about that game, but it's tough to sell, and it's tough to like kind of like, you have to play it and understand the game before you really start to understand the game, if you know what I mean.
No, for sure. Definitely.
You have to fall in love with the game. It doesn't happen by looking just trailers and stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. And, visually, the game might be a bit less appealing. I mean, before the update, I think 4.1 it looked a little bit, more or less janky, but yet it was still very interesting. It's the gameplay mechanics that really, as you say, make Project Zomboid the interesting game that it is today.
Yeah, but it's definitely risky. Risky is the word that I tried to describe here. Providing that type of game nowadays is a bit risky because it seems that the whole narrative with Escape from Tarkov and these other like big shooter games have kind of like pushed the kind of like mainstream attention a bit more towards 3D, which is kind of like unfortunate because there's so many good 2D survival games out there. For example, one of my favorite survival games is called Neo Scavenger. I don't know if you have ever heard about it.
Of course, yeah. I didn't play it, but I know about this game.
Yeah, and it's totally 2D and really kind of like not that much visual in that sense. So the main narrative is around 3D nowadays. It's just something that kind of like you have to get used to it if you are wanting to stay in this business for a long time. But I'm not saying that there's no room to make 2D games anymore. It's just it's more risky for this path that I'm trying to make.
It was an executive decision, basically.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you a question in relation to Project Zomboid. Project Zomboid is one of those games where you can kind of create an adventure for yourself.
Yeah.
If you're playing by yourself, with your friend, there can be all sorts of scenarios, and you can, create your own little goals and journey. Is an aspect like that, will an aspect like this be present?
Yeah, sure. I'm definitely taking inspiration from Project Zomboid. It seems that every kind of like professional survival game developer takes inspiration from Zomboid because it's such a good game. I think one key aspect that Zomboid does well is that kind of like you can build your kind of like hub in a sense that you, for example, you can go to the woods and you can kind of like set up your living environment there, or then you can use the existing buildings and barricade them, and then you can kind of like, you have this kind of like home base where you transition to make these loot runs and you come back and do this kind of behavior. And I want to implement something really similar that you can interact with the environment in multiple ways. For example, I have the whole container system ideologies taken inspiration from Project Zomboid, and I will have multiple same kind of mechanics in terms of shelter like in Zomboid. So definitely.
Oh, that's really cool. I remember speaking to a friend of mine like a while back. We were saying, wouldn't it be cool to have Project Zomboid but in 3D? And I think it's coming into a reality right now. And this is not a joke. I'm not saying this especially.
No, but to be honest, Zomboid level of mechanics in 3D would be kind of like the dream survival game for many. But there's a reason why it hasn't been made yet, because it's almost impossible. It's so time consuming to make those things in 3D. So it hasn't happened. I don't know when was Project Zomboid released, but let's just say almost
a while back.
8 years. Nobody in 8 years hasn't pulled anything close to that in 3D. Daisy is probably the most kind of like far-lived, most community-loved, and who have stayed relevant for all these years. So it's just so difficult genre to nail with and so time-consuming. So I would hope somebody would make Zomboid in 3D. Maybe they do. Indie Stone does it himself, but we never know.
Maybe. Well, at least we're going to get something rather not similar, but close to it with Road to Vostok, no?
Yeah,
Similar
even though
aspects.
there's not zombies, but...
Without the zombies, of course. No fantasy. Last few questions. Do you plan to implement any ally NPC followers, some people you can find and befriend and take with you on a mission?
Not kind of like companion fashion, but in Stalker, for example, there's this like campfire mentality where there's like group of stalkers that form together, and there's this like in-game community moments, you could say. So I want to implement something similar. So there's going to be this store map in the game, which will have that kind of like the NPCs will kind of like gather there. There's kind of like tasks that even the NPCs can take, and I want that there's some kind of hub in the game world where you can meet NPCs even though they are not that, meaning you don't have to shoot them. There's no like hostility involved. But also I think when we talk about companions and these kind of things, I'm planning for example, that next devlog video will reveal one of those things. It's not going to be. Maybe I'm not revealing anything yet, but you will see next devlog video. The last clip of the video will show one of those.
All right, perfect. Well, we'll keep an eye on that for sure. That is intriguing and exciting. And probably my final question would be: would your dream game like Road to Vostok and your whole dream of becoming a sole developer be something that you would have done, say, 5 or 10 years ago, with the technology being of the technology 5 to 10 years ago, or was now the right time with the technology to do so because you could create your own workflow, as you said, and be able to logically manage the whole creation process of the game?
That's actually quite a good question. I was kind of afraid that you were going to ask this classic "why not Unreal" type of question, but this was much better.
Thank you.
In terms of technical sense, it has been definitely more easier to make games nowadays. There's no arguing about that. But in my personal sense, it's more about the skill issue, because Road to Vostok is pretty complex game in terms of development, and 5 years ago I would not have all these skills yet. So that's why I didn't make that game back then, because I would have failed and I wouldn't have the confidence to make these devlogs and claim that I'm going to make the best hardcore survival game out there. So it's just a matter of I wasn't that capable as a developer 5 years ago. But in terms of tech, my kind of like core premise around game engine is that they are just tools. For example, it's kind of same if you are a writer and you are writing a book and somebody asks what kind of text editor you are using.
I see.
It's kind of like irrelevant question. At the same time, it's still relevant, but it's kind of like still irrelevant because it's just a tool. And for example, the current version of Unity that I use is pretty basic, but I have built so many custom tools on top of it to fit with this project specifically. So, for example, if some beginner Unity user would open my game project, there would be so many different UI things and tools that he even wouldn't understand what those are, because they are specifically made. So game engines are kind of like platforms that you build upon. And that's kind of like the annoying aspect of this Unity Unreal discussion that is always happening, because many of the kind of like players doesn't understand that the game engine that the developers use is not the one it's just that people just natively download from the website. It's built upon, there's custom tools, custom editors, so the Unreal Unity conversation it's just more like who has the better YouTube showcase reels. It doesn't really matter.
I see. So what you're saying is that complex games actually utilize, like you said, a completely, let's say, tailored and bespoke how do you call them? Development tools, correct?
Yeah, totally custom pipelines, custom like helper scripts, custom editor scripts, custom workflows, custom middleware from the different data types and kind of like databases. So the engine is just the like starting point. Every kind of like professional game developer starts to design that engine to tailor that project. For example, when I had that pre-production phase, one of the main pillars of that pre-production years was to learn and design that Unity in a way that it would speed up the development and help me to work as a solo developer for this type of complex game.
Okay, wow, that's really interesting. That's something that I actually didn't really know before, and now that I know about it, it makes a lot of sense, and it opens up my understanding in terms of game development.
And I would even argue that most games that fail in terms of like if they design a product that is kind of like they are biting too big bite, or they're chewing something that they can can't handle with. It's usually the problems lie with the pre-production phase. It's either that they haven't fully figured out how big of a project they are actually taking on, or they haven't really tailored their workflows and engines and tools in a way that they are efficient to use on a daily basis. Because when I was working as a teacher, and I had this kind of like mentor side of bird's eye view, and I see how the students struggled with the kind of like daily routines of making the assets, making the stuff. So if we say that there's two groups of students, one group uses the native engine with the native tools, kind of like the basic workflows, and one group decided to spend a week of actually researching and learning how to automate stuff, how to use procedural generation, how to make something manual automatic, and they have a 1 year period of making game. It might be that one student group never makes it and one is ready within few months if they really spend that time efficiently. So it's really, really important, but pre-production is something that people seem kind of like, it's not that exciting because we are talking about writing stuff down, doing research. It's nothing fancy, nothing show-offy, and people like to see visual cool stuff. That's why all those Unreal highlight videos and cool photorealistic graphic snippets are so kind of like... people just are drawn to what is shiny and cool, but what is actually important in game development is usually trying to pre-plan stuff that is going to be difficult and time-consuming, and try to figure out solutions on how to automate or some way help you to make those more efficiently.
I think my questions are done for the moment. Is there anything else that you would like to add from your side? Please feel free.
I'm guessing nothing major, just maybe I want to highlight that Road to Vostok is a long-term project. This isn't just a sprint or race to the finish line or early access, and I'm not in a hurry. This project won't appear anywhere, but I'm totally committed to build my whole rest of game dev career around this one project. That's why I'm named my company also Road to Vostok Ltd.
Okay.
Because I'm not doing any other productions anymore, and I think that's one of the like key things about the industry that I don't currently like, that many game studios are built around this launch release cycle, and then games are forgotten and they move to another title, and we never get this kind of like totally finished visions on the market, because everything is rushed to the early access phase, and then there's already rush to the next production and so on. But this whole game idea and my whole company is going to build around this one game, so there will be no other titles with my career and my studio, but it's a long-term investment, but it will get there slowly but surely.
This is so exciting. You know what's a bit more exciting for me personally is to review this conversation 5 years from now and see what had changed.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something that we could do.
Maybe I have taken totally different route. I have run with the money and I have 3 different titles. No, but yeah.
You never know. We'll see.
Yeah.
But that is really, let's say, honorable of you to say that. And I think myself and many other gamers and viewers of this video would agree and attest to the fact that developers like you are a treasure. We will support you in all the ways that we can. We are really happy that you're creating such wonderful games and unique experiences based on your personal unique experiences. And I think that's the magic about indie game development, is that you are your own boss, and currently you are alone and you are literally your own boss. And it's a passion project that is created with love and passion, and it's truly felt. Even through the really short demo that you have made and through the devlogs that you're creating, the passion that you are conveying and kind of putting into this project is very noticeable. So again, thank you so much for taking this risk and we really, really can't wait to play this game. And thank you so much for being a part of this podcast and for being my first guest.
Thanks. This was really fun.